So when we're talking about the need for a ceasefire immediately, and when we talk about lifting the siege of starving the population and preventing food and medicine and water from the situation, we're talking about something immediate now. And I use the metaphor, get your knee off my neck. I can't breathe, allow me to breathe. This has an immediacy and requires action by all of us. And what happens in this country is what's pivotal. Because the whole world agrees. International law is clear. What's happening is a war crime, is a genocide, is ethnic cleansing, cannot be justified morally or legally or politically. And the only reason it's taking place is because this country, and particularly this president, is giving it the green light. And it can stop, and we have the ability to stop it, and should be able to stop it. The fact that we haven't been able to do it for 6 months is amazing. It's an indictment both of the church and of civil society and of the system in this country that allowed it to happen. So I'm not going to say any more about that. I think there is now a clear majority in this country who believe that we need a ceasefire now immediately. And that we need to allow humanitarian assistance unencumbered, unimpeded, to be allowed in. It just is unconscionable that the Israelis not only don't provide food and water, which is their responsibility under international law, they are preventing it, they are controlling it, they are disallowing things like anesthesia, disallowing things like surgical threads and needles. They're disallowing things like water purification kits. Unbelievable that this is actually happening, and we should put an end and a stop to that right away. So I won't say any more about that. The second point that I want to address is that once we achieve number one, which I think we can and should, the goal is not to go back to the way things were on October 6th. The goal is to create a measure of justice, to start a process that leads to peace, justice, reconciliation, and coexistence between Israeli Jews and Palestinian Arabs. Now, I know some people will tell you this is not a conflict. And certainly it is not symmetrical. And certainly this is not just two groups, let's get them together and let's get them to understand each other and let's break down hatreds and stereotypes between them and create reconciliation. I know some people will tell you this is a clear settler colonialism and we need to decolonize the situation. Other people will tell you we have to weigh the claims of each side, historical, religious, etc. And find a formula that suits both of them. I was one of those who supported for many, many years the idea, the two-state solution, that Palestinians should be given a state in the area that was captured in 1967, 22% of Palestine. Not the best solution, but at least it made a lot of sense at that time. until the Zionist movement, of course, moved in with all these settlements and settlers, and it's now become no longer possible. So I wrote a little book called Beyond the Two-State Solution, where I show that the two-state solution is no longer viable, but that it is possible to think of a solution that goes beyond it. And for those of you who haven't read it, I strongly suggest that you read it. You can download it for free from the website of Nonviolence International. If you want, you can buy it there. The beauty about it is that it has a little executive summary in the back. So if you have a big stack of books that you need to read, you can at least start by reading the little executive summary. Basically, what I did in this book is say that these two movements, the Zionist movement, the idea that you want a Jewish state, as Jewish as France is French, and the Palestinian Arab national movement that says Palestine Arabiya, Palestine is Arab. Who are these people coming here? These two movements, let's face it, cannot live together. They are a zero-sum conflict. Every advantage to one side is a disadvantage to the other. Each ideology views the other as an existential threat to its very essence. They fight over land and they fight over demography. Every additional Jewish immigrant that comes and makes Aliyah is a threat to me. Every additional baby that is born to me and to our people is a threat to Israel, an existential threat. So how can these two movements in any way survive? Especially if we can't divide the land between them along the 67 borders, which is the two-state solution. How can they coexist? How can they live together? The first time I came up with this idea, I was actually invited to give a speech before the Jewish Historical Association in New York on the occasion of 100 years to the Balfour Declaration. There was a Palestinian perspective on the Balfour Declaration. 1 week before I gave that speech, I was disinvited because somebody on their board of trustees said, "Are you crazy? You're bringing a Palestinian to talk about the Balfour Declaration." So I decided to give the speech anyway at a nearby church. And I invited the staff who really wanted to hear me and anybody else. And I said, "Look, you guys, you are Zionists, you believe in a Jewish state. You're not, Peace Now and JVP, and if not now, you support the idea of a Jewish state. And you have every reason to be happy for the Balfour Declaration. Because at the time of the Balfour Declaration, you had nothing in Palestine. Yes, there were Jewish people living there, but they spoke Arabic and they ate hummus and they danced tabke and they considered themselves Palestinian. They just happened to be of the Jewish faith, just like I am of a Christian faith and majority Muslims. And don't tell me that we have religious connections. Yes, of course I know you have religious connections. Once a year you say next year in Jerusalem, yes, very nice. I said, do you know that Muslims 5 times every day turn to Mecca to pray? That doesn't give them any rights in Saudi Arabia or in its oil wealth. The fact that we have a connection, religious connection to that land. I said, okay, you tell me, but you have a historical connection. We used to have a kingdom there at the time of David and Solomon. I said, that's the king. You had historical connection 3,000 years ago. Do you know how many other countries had a historical connection and ruled Palestine over the last 3,000 years? And I can name you about 12 or 14 of them, starting with Italy, Greece, Turkey, Iraq, Iran, Egypt. Who didn't have a country here? In the Middle East, and every conqueror came and ruled it for 300, 400, 500 years. But what you did manage to do, you created a country there so powerful, with every possible advantage in the world, technological, military, scientific, financial. You have control over the whole area. You have nuclear weapons, you have an arms industry, you have every possible advantage there. Meanwhile, the Palestinians, you said it's a country without a people, for a people without a country. You made the idea of Palestine, you made the word Palestine illegal. People won't use the P word. They're Arabs. We don't even exist in your mentality as a legal, legitimate people. But you failed, because today Palestine and Palestinians exist and are more clear about their identity than ever before. And this, somehow, the Zionist movement can't deal with this reality, that they really have failed after 100 years. And 100 years isn't very long in historic terms. But I said it is possible to find a solution. That solution requires that we do some out-of-the-box thinking. And it requires that both sides need to tweak, change, amend their ideology to somehow include the other party. And I'll start with our side. We Palestinians must recognize, again, without pretending there's any symmetry between the two sides or any equality and legitimacy, we Palestinians must recognize that today in Palestine there are 7 million Jews who live there and who consider it their home. Okay, you may think it's illegal and illegitimate and they're living on stolen property and they're there by force or whatever. They're there and they're going nowhere. And nobody is saying they should go anywhere. So my Palestine, even though it is an Arab country, it's also a Jewish place. So my Palestinian nationalism has to change to accommodate the fact that there are these 7 million non-Arabs living in my country. But I say, by the same token, you as a Zionist Jew must recognize that today your Jewish state has 7 million non-Jews living in it, under its control and under its rules, and they're going nowhere either. So your Zionism has to somehow accommodate a population living there who thinks of this place as its home. Is that possible? I think it is. I think it is. And the only way that that happens is for a new state in all of Palestine that somehow accommodates, accepts, understands, legitimizes the rights and the aspirations of both groups. And I say it's possible. You can give me everything I want except for exclusivity, and you can give the Zionist Jewish Israelis everything they ever wanted except for exclusivity and domination. Now, you have a number of problems you have to solve. One of them is the problem of demography. You have to create a system that maintains and guarantees your rights regardless of who has 51% of the population. And it's possible. You can write the Constitution and create mechanisms that guarantees the rights of the minority and the rights of the individual regardless of who wins the next election and who has more voters with them. You have to address the fears, the security concerns of both sides. So I imagined a number of tools that can achieve that. One of them says, why don't you have the defense minister, the chief of the army, navy, and air force, and nuclear weapons, whatever, always be Jewish with an Arab deputy. But the chief of the police and the internal security will always be a Palestinian Arab with a Jewish deputy. And every other position in the police or army should be on the basis of merit. You can create a constitutional court that will ensure equality and absence of discrimination in public affairs and public institutions. You can guarantee the Jewish right of return. It's very essential for most Zionists. But you also recognize the Palestinian right of return. You can provide for Palestinians who lost their homes and land without kicking somebody out of the home where they are living, which they stole, or the land on which they built their new buildings. They can stay, you can keep them, but you provide out of public land. You provide housing and alternative land to those who lost their land. Because the new state will serve all its citizens, the entire population, and not just serve the Jewish population. So the state can be fully Jewish, but at the same time fully Arab. In fact, it will end up being a better Jewish state than Israel is today, and a better Arab state than most of the Arab countries that we see around us. It will be a genuinely democratic state which allows both groups to prosper. So this is my little contribution to that discussion. But I recognize, and everybody, every time I bring up that question, says, well, how do you get there? How do you achieve it? How can you get a majority of Arabs and Jews to accept this type of solution? And I have some answers to that in the book. But the most important answer is this. I recognize that those who have privilege don't give it up easily. There has to be a struggle, and there has to be pressure, internal and external, to allow them to give up their privileged position. It's just like slavery. You can't just end slavery by saying, I believe in equality, because you're taking my property if I'm a slave owner. You're taking my property. When you talk about eliminating slavery, yes, I'm talking about eliminating slavery. I'm talking about eliminating apartheid. I'm talking about eliminating Jewish supremacy. I'll be upfront about it. I'm talking about genuine equality. You see, when I came up with this idea, I started with a list. What are the minimum requirements of each group? And at the top of the requirements for Palestinians is equality. We want to live in a state where we are equal to everybody else. So that has to be guaranteed. And we guarantee whatever is important to the Jewish group. Okay, that's the second thing. The third thing, and that's the final thing with which I will end my speech, is in order to get there, we need to have a movement of people, both inside and outside the country, that work towards these goals. Because let's face it, Israel and Israeli Jews cannot survive a single week without much massive outside support. But it's true for us Palestinians also. We cannot survive without the help and assistance and support of our friends in the Arab and Muslim world. We need the outside world. The country is too tiny, cannot live by itself. I mean, unlike South Africa, which had a huge area, they had coal mines, and they had diamonds and uranium, and a huge area, and still they couldn't survive without the rest of the world. We, Palestine, Israel, cannot survive a week, a day, without the rest of the world. Economically, trade-wise, in terms of just tourism, in terms of where do we go for a vacation. Israel has a very high standard of living, and I think I heard 1/3 of Israelis travel abroad every year, just for vacations. Now they can't do it in the surrounding countries. They have to try and go to Europe, and many times they hide the fact that they are Israelis. So for sports, for trade, for commerce, for music, you have the Eurovision now, they're talking about preventing Israel from joining. Talk about universities, there's an academic boycott now against them. So we need the rest of the world. We're also important to the rest of the world. So we have to build a movement of solidarity for the demand of justice and equality. And when we talk about justice and equality, we talk about all of Palestine. Yes, from the river to the sea. And don't let people frighten you by saying, oh, you mean Palestine be free from the river to the sea, you want it free of Jews? No. Free of racism. Free of discrimination. Free of apartheid. Free of supremacy by one group over the others. All of Palestine needs to be free. And in order to get there, we need to build coalitions. We need to reach out to people outside our narrow groups. We cannot keep talking in the echo chamber of those who agree with us and those who hold the same views. So with this I will end and maybe bleed into the strategic discussions that you are going to be having, which I won't join in, but I'll give you some of my thoughts. There are important constituencies that need to be brought into this discussion. We need to reach out to the Muslim community in this country, who are now just beginning to find their voice. Most of them are still scared and afraid of being involved in politics because they come from countries where they have been oppressed, where politics is a dirty word, where the FBI may come and kick me out of the country. Many of them are refusing to even register to vote because they're worried. That's politics. We don't want to be involved. So we need to reach out. Thank God for the second generation and third generation. They're not afraid. But their parents are. Many in the Arab and Muslim community, we need to reach out to them, bring them into the conversation. We need to reach out to the Jewish community because for all their power and influence, they are feeling afraid and vulnerable. And we need to bring them into the conversation and address their concerns and their needs, but also challenge them for what they are doing in supporting policies which they really hate, of Netanyahu and Ben-Gvir and all the craziness that's taking place in Israel. We need to reach out to the churches and not only the mainline Protestant churches. We need to really work with the Catholics. Very important. We need to work with the evangelicals because despite their apparent total support of Israel, that Christian Zionism is really very, very skin deep. It's not very deep. It's just what they've heard. They haven't heard somebody talk to them in their language, quoting scripture to them instead of quoting international human rights law. You have to quote scripture to them. And you have to speak their language and bring them into the conversation and bring them into the sense of justice that we are talking about. Thank God there is movement in this country, especially among the young people, especially among some Democrats. We need to build coalitions with progressive people. And we need to make connection between the injustice that's taking place there and the injustice that's taking place in this country. So this is what we can do, and I want to insist, and with this I will end. We are not without hope, to the contrary. We are full of hope. In the midst of all this suffering, in the midst of all our lament, we stand for hope. We stand for resurrection. We stand for the movement of history into something that's better. So we should not be afraid and we should not be apologetic. We are powerful. We are on the right side of history. We are moving in the right direction.